Hey everyone, before we dive in, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you. I never intended to bring it up that evening. The wine was meant to take the edge off, not rip me wide open. It was one of those calm Friday nights we'd been having a lot of recently. Nothing on the schedule, no fights, just a gentle, steady rhythm to our days that had become pretty routine. My husband, Alex, was sitting on the other side of the kitchen counter, thumbing through his phone while I poured myself another glass. This made 3. I kept telling myself I was simply relaxing after a long week. But deep down, the drinks were unlocking something I'd been burying for ages. I'm Sarah. I'm 38 years old. Alex and I have been married for 12 years. To anyone looking in from the outside, everything seemed stable. Decent careers, a tidy home, regular weekend habits, family gatherings during holidays. People often called us reliable. And for a long time, I thought that was plenty. I didn't need constant excitement. I understood that intense passion cools over time and that love evolves into something more peaceful. But there's a big gap between peaceful and hollow, and I hadn't fully grasped how deeply we'd slipped into the hollow part until that night. Alex used to really look at me when I spoke, not just a quick glance, but truly focus. He'd ask follow-up questions, chuckle at my dry humor, grab my hand without a second thought. At some point, all that faded away. Our talks became nothing more than logistics. Did you handle that payment? What time are you heading out tomorrow? What's for dinner tonight? Even when we were in the same room, it felt like we were living separate existences, side by side, but never connecting. I tried to patch things up in subtle ways, suggesting new habits, planning date nights that he ended up forgetting. Little efforts to remind him I was still right there. I picked up that bottle of wine hoping it might make the night feel more relaxed and fun. Instead, it forced me to be real. Alex set his phone aside to get a beer from the fridge, and when he sat back down, he asked offhand, "You good? You've been kinda quiet." It wasn't real worry, just a casual note, but it hit something inside me that broke loose. I let out a quick, bitter laugh that caught us both off guard. "Do you ever feel like we're basically just roommates?" I asked, trying to play it off as light, but my voice wavered. He looked puzzled, shrugged, and said, "I guess that's how marriage gets sometimes." Straightforward, brushing it aside. Done. The wine warmed my throat and chest, and before I could hold back, everything started pouring out. I told him I felt unseen. I told him I missed feeling desired, not just relied on. I told him I felt alone even when we were sitting right next to each other every evening. Alex listened without cutting in. That should have felt good. But it didn't. His expression stayed even, almost detached, like he was politely waiting for me to wrap up a report for work. When I finally ran out of words, the quiet dragged on. I was waiting for him to push back, to comfort me, to admit he felt something similar and didn't know how to fix it either. Instead, he let out a slow breath and said, "I didn't realize you felt like that." No apology. No offer to try. Just a neutral observation, careful and flat. Fueled by the drinks and years of holding it all in, I kept going. I confessed that I sometimes daydreamed about what it would feel like to be with someone who still truly saw me, who noticed a new haircut, who reached for me because they wanted to, not because it was expected. I wasn't admitting to wanting an affair. I wasn't saying I'd done anything. I was just sharing a feeling, not an intention. But as soon as those words were out, I saw a change in his eyes. Any trace of the warmth I'd been missing vanished entirely. He sat up straighter, crossed his arms, and stared at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. "So that's what this is about," he said quietly, but his tone was icier than I'd ever heard from him. I tried to clarify, to take it back a little, but he stopped me. "You're unhappy," he said. "You've been unhappy for a while. And instead of bringing it up sober, you got drunk and told me you're fantasizing about other guys." I started to explain that wasn't what I meant, but he stood up. Alex grabbed his keys and wallet, every move deliberate and calm. "I'm going for a drive," he said. "I don't want to say anything I'll regret." He didn't yell. He didn't slam the door. He simply walked out. I stayed at the counter, staring at my half-full glass, finally aware that I'd spoken the truth aloud. And no matter what happened next, I couldn't stuff it back inside. The house seemed different once he was gone, like it was holding its breath. I wiped down the already spotless kitchen, rinsed the same glass over again, and kept checking my phone for a text that never arrived. Midnight came and went, then 1 o'clock. The buzz from the wine wore off, leaving a painful clear-headedness that stung worse than any headache. I went over every word, every expression on his face, questioning whether speaking up had finally caused real harm. When the front door opened around 2 a.m., I jumped. Alex came in quietly, hung up his jacket, and placed his keys down. He didn't seem mad. He looked decided, and that terrified me more. He sat across from me at the table, right where we'd been earlier, and for a minute, we both stayed silent. I drove around for hours, he said eventually, thinking about everything you said. His voice was even, almost soft. And I need to be honest too. I nodded, preparing for the worst. He told me he hadn't been happy either, that he'd felt distant, worn out, unsure how to close the gap anymore. But then he said something I never saw coming. When you mentioned wondering what it would be like with someone else, he went on, it hit me that I've already accepted we're not that for each other anymore. The words sank in gradually, building up until they felt impossible to ignore. He said he still loved me, but not in the way that inspires building a life together, not in the way that makes you fight for it. He'd stayed because leaving felt harder than admitting we'd been running on old memories. He thought staying steady equaled winning. He thought quiet meant everything was okay. I wasn't shocked tonight, he said. I felt like you confirmed what I'd already been thinking. I asked if he wanted to try fixing us. Therapy, some space, whatever it took. He shook his head. Not meanly, not brushing me off, just truthfully. I don't think repairing this would actually make either of us happy, he said. I think it would just teach us how to fake it better. That stung deeper than any outburst would have. In his eyes, there was no bad guy. Just two people who'd waited too long to say anything. We talked straight through until sunrise, remembering the great times, pinpointing when things shifted, acknowledging that neither of us had stepped out on the other, but we'd both quietly given up in our own ways. He admitted he'd gotten too comfortable not putting in effort. I admitted I'd built up resentment from feeling undesired. In the middle of all that tiredness and coming to terms, the choice formed without us ever saying it outright. We weren't going to keep going like this. The following weeks felt unreal. No big blow-ups, no intense drama. Just practical talks and paperwork as we split up a life built around habits. Friends couldn't believe it. But you guys never argued, they'd say, like the lack of fights proved we were solid, when really it showed how much we'd been avoiding everything. Alex moved out first, into a small place on the other side of town. The evening he loaded the final box, we held each other for a long while. It wasn't passionate, it was thankful for the years we gave it our best, for the truth that finally showed up, even if it was overdue. Being on my own was quieter than I'd imagined. At first, the emptiness felt like blame. Then, it started feeling like freedom. I realized how much I'd been making myself smaller to fit. How many times I'd bitten my tongue to avoid rocking the boat. I didn't turn joyful overnight, but I felt less weighed down. I quit using wine to dull the nights. I began sleeping more soundly. I found myself laughing more, even over little things. Alex and I still check in now and then. We're civil, kind, even. There's no anger, just a mutual recognition that love can dim without any fireworks or fallout. People sometimes ask if I regret that night, if I wish I'd stayed quiet. The reality is, the wine didn't invent the truth. It just stripped away my final reason to hide it. Speaking my real feelings didn't destroy my marriage. It showed me the marriage had already slipped away. His reaction wasn't harsh or over the top. It was steady, straightforward, and definitive. And as much as it hurt, it handed me something I didn't even know I craved more than easy comfort or the familiar routine. Permission to stop acting like silent unhappiness was the same as peace.